Back when money was tight and days were long, Aussie working men sat down to dinners you hardly ever see today. From oyster fritters to beans and weenies, these meals weren't fancy, but they filled bellies, warmed homes, and carried a taste of simpler times. Let's take a look back at 15 Aussie working man's dinners no one makes anymore. Oyster fritters. Back in the day, oyster fritters were a quick way for coastal workers to get something hearty without fuss. Fresh oysters were folded into a simple batter of flour, eggs, and a splash of milk before being shallow fried until golden. The result was crisp on the outside, tender inside, and packed with briny flavour. Served with bread or chips, they were cheap fuel after long hours at sea or on the docks. Though oysters are more of a delicacy now, fritters once stretched humble shellfish into a filling meal. For many, the sizzling sound in the pan and the salty aroma remained tied to evenings when kitchens were small, budgets tight, but plates were never left empty. Apricot chicken. Not every working class dinner was heavy. Sometimes a touch of sweetness found its way onto the table. Apricot chicken became a staple in Australian homes during the 70s and 80s, when canned fruit and packet soups were everyday pantry items. Chunks of chicken were baked in a sauce made from apricot nectar and French onion soup mix, turning out glossy, tender, and just a little tangy sweet. Served with rice or mashed potatoes, it was a one-dish wonder that filled hungry stomachs without stretching the purse strings. Kids loved the fruity glaze, while parents loved how simple it was to put together after long shifts. Today, apricot chicken lingers mostly in memory, but its comforting taste still sparks nostalgia. Tuna bake. Few dishes carried the week like a tuna bake. Workers would come home to a casserole dish bubbling in the oven, filled with cooked pasta, tinned tuna, and a creamy sauce, sometimes jazzed up with peas or sweet corn. A topping of breadcrumbs or grated cheese added a crunchy crust, making every bite satisfying. It was cheap, filling, and easy to stretch across a family of 5. The aroma drifting through the house was pure comfort, the kind that made you forget the long hours spent in workshops or warehouses. Tuna bake wasn't fancy, but it brought warmth to the table and left no one hungry. Its simplicity made it timeless, even if it's rarely served in modern kitchens. Shit on a shingle. Soldiers knew it first, but many working men carried the dish home. Creamed beef on toast, more commonly nicknamed shit on a shingle. Thin slices of beef, or sometimes minced meat, were simmered in a white sauce, seasoned simply with pepper, then spooned generously over toast. It was quick, cheap, and could be made with pantry staples even during tough times. The name stuck, though the taste was far more comforting than the phrase suggests. For men heading out to early shifts or coming in from long nights, this dish meant instant energy on a tight budget. While it rarely appears on tables today, older generations remember it well as one of those no-nonsense meals. Liver and onions. There was a time when liver and onions was standard fare in working households. Slices of liver, dusted in flour, were fried quickly in a hot pan until browned, then paired with caramelized onions that softened the strong flavour. Gravy often followed, poured over mashed potatoes to complete the plate. It was inexpensive protein, readily available at butchers, and kept families fed when money was short. The smell was distinctive, filling kitchens with a rich aroma that some loved and others never forgot. For many, liver and onions was not just a dinner, but a reminder that even humble cuts could carry the weight of a long day's work. Sloppy joes with manwich sauce. Some meals were all about convenience, and sloppy joes with manwich sauce fit the bill. Ground beef was browned in a pan, mixed with a sweet and tangy canned sauce, then piled onto soft hamburger buns. The filling was messy, dripping down hands and plates, but that was part of the charm. For working families, it was a budget-friendly dinner that fed a crowd without fuss. Kids loved the bold flavour and saucy texture, while adults appreciated the quick clean-up after long shifts. It wasn't elegant food, but it delivered warmth and satisfaction. Sloppy Joes were proof that even from a tin, dinner could still feel homemade and hearty. Swiss steak. In tougher times, cooks knew how to stretch tougher cuts of beef, and that's where Swiss steak came in. Slices of inexpensive meat were dredged in flour, browned, and then simmered slowly in a tomato-based sauce with onions, celery, and peppers. The long cooking time transformed the meat into something tender and flavourful, perfect for serving with mashed potatoes or rice. It filled the kitchen with a rich, savoury aroma that promised comfort after a long day. Swiss steak wasn't fancy dining, but it turned the most ordinary ingredients into a meal that felt special, proving patience and slow heat could make magic out of less. Beans and weenies. Sometimes the simplest meals were the most filling, and beans and weenies were exactly that. A tin of baked beans was heated with sliced sausages or frankfurters, then served in a bowl with bread on the side. It was cheap, quick, and guaranteed to leave no stomach empty. The smoky sweet beans mixed with salty sausage made for a homely, comforting flavour that appealed to both kids and adults. Many remember it as a weeknight standby, when money and time were short. Beans and weenies may seem humble today, but back then it was a dish that kept households going strong without breaking the budget. Welsh rarebit over toast. Toast was never just plain bread when Welsh rarebit came into the picture. Thick slices were topped with a savoury cheese sauce laced with mustard, ale, or Worcestershire sauce, then grilled until bubbling and golden. It transformed humble bread into a rich, warming dish perfect for cold evenings. Workers enjoyed it with a pint at the pub or as a quick supper at home, savouring the tangy, creamy topping that clung to every bite. Welsh rarebit wasn't complicated, but it carried tradition and comfort in equal measure. The simple pairing of cheese and toast was elevated into something memorable that many still recall fondly. Corned beef on rye. Rye bread and corned beef made a pairing that filled bellies without ceremony. Thinly sliced corned beef was stacked onto dark rye, sometimes with mustard or pickles to sharpen the flavour. It was quick to prepare, easy to carry, and hearty enough to sustain long shifts in factories or workshops. The chewy bread and salty meat created a simple balance that became a lunchbox classic. While delis kept the tradition alive, for working households, it was an everyday meal. No frills, just nourishment. Corned beef on rye might not grace modern tables often, but it remains a reminder of straightforward food that did the job. Stuffed cabbage. Long before takeaway became common, stuffed cabbage was a dish that stretched simple ingredients into something hearty. Cabbage leaves were blanched, then rolled around a filling of minced meat, rice and onions, all simmered slowly in a tomato sauce. It was affordable, filling, and made use of whatever scraps were on hand. Families loved it because one pot could feed many mouths, and the flavours deepened as it cooked. The aroma of cabbage and tomato together filled kitchens with warmth, even on the leanest days. Stuffed cabbage wasn't glamorous, but it carried the spirit of thrift and care, showing that patience could turn humble produce into true comfort. Onion loaf. Few side dishes were as bold as an onion loaf. Rings of onion were dredged in seasoned flour, layered into a loaf pan, and deep-fried or baked until the whole mass held together. It was golden, crunchy, and unapologetically heavy, best served alongside grilled meat or even on its own, with sauce for dipping. Workers liked it because it was cheap to make and turned the humble onion into something filling enough to share. Breaking off hunks of the loaf at the table brought people together in a simple, satisfying way. Though rarely seen today, onion loaf remains a reminder of kitchens that prized both thrift and flavour. Chicken cacciatore. Italian immigrants brought chicken cacciatore to working tables, and it quickly became a favourite. Pieces of chicken were browned and then simmered slowly in a sauce of tomatoes, peppers, onions, and herbs, sometimes with a splash of wine. The result was tender meat in a fragrant, rustic sauce that begged for bread or pasta to soak it up. Families appreciated how it stretched one chicken across many plates, while the rich aroma gave the sense of a feast. Cacciatore, meaning hunter's style, wasn't fancy cooking, but it turned everyday poultry into something deeply satisfying, linking old-world tradition with the needs of hard-working households. Rumaki. Back in mid-century kitchens, rumaki was a curious but beloved appetizer. Small pieces of chicken liver or water chestnuts were wrapped in bacon, skewered and broiled until crisp. Sweet soy or teriyaki-style marinades often added a tangy glaze that caramelized as it cooked. Though it might seem unusual now, rumaki was a thrifty way to use organ meats while dressing them up for guests or family suppers. The salty, smoky crunch followed by a burst of rich or crisp filling made it memorable. For many, it was a taste of parties and potlucks, a dish that showed resourcefulness could still deliver flair. Clams Casino. No list of old-fashioned working dishes would be complete without clams Casino. Fresh clams were opened and topped with breadcrumbs, peppers, herbs, and a strip of bacon before being broiled until sizzling. It was a dish that balanced indulgence with practicality, since clams were once inexpensive along the coast. Served hot from the oven, they carried smoky, savoury notes that made even simple meals feel celebratory. Workers enjoyed them as a weekend treat, a little luxury after days of routine fare. Clams Casino may be rare now, but for those who remember, it's tied to evenings when modest kitchens still turned out something festive. And that's the end of our journey through these forgotten Aussie working man's dinners. They may not be on our tables anymore, but they still live on in memories, stories, and the kitchens of those who keep old traditions alive. If this trip down memory lane made you smile, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who remembers the taste of simpler times. Until next time, cheers.